Friends, today we come to be reminded of the greatest obligation of being a Christian, and by extension, a religious person. The demand to love God and neighbor. The first reading from Deuteronomy tells us that to love God means to keep the commandments God has given us. That we come to love God and not to fulfill the commandment of loving God and loving our neighbor. In our second reading, Jesus is our high priest who is able to listen, who is able to understand our situation, to forgive us, and more so, to help us to prioritize our way of acting and relating with one another, knowing that God and the neighbor come first. There was this King Rat that decided to take a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And the mice, with their king, hearing that King Rat had gone for a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, were delighted. And so the rat left, King Rat left to the Holy Land. And after some days, after a long time, after prayers, reflection in the Holy Land, having come to see and to experience the place of birth of a great religion, King Rat was back to his neighbor. And King Mouse, having heard that King Rat had gone for pilgrimage, said to the self and to other mouse, "I am going to congratulate King Rat." And the other mouse told King Mouse, "Well, you better be careful. Remember, he is one of our big enemies and he hates us." And King Mouse said, "No, I am sure he is changed after paying a visit to the Holy Land. Must be more prayerful, but most of all, I am sure his relationship with us is changed after experiencing the pilgrimage." And King Mouse set out to see and to congratulate King Rat. From a distance, he saw King Rat surely dressed in the robes of a pilgrim, praying, going down on knees and up, looking up into the sky. And you could tell the pilgrimage had changed King Rat. But no sooner King Mouse reached next to the King Rat, the King Rat pounced towards the mouse. And thanks be to God, the mouse was fast enough to disappear. And King Mouse was back to the kingdom. And the rest of the mouse asked him, "What went on? What happened?" He said, "Yes, King Rat went to the pilgrim, but he prays like a pilgrim, but he punches like a cat." This is a dichotomy that can develop in us as people of religion and people who profess a faith in God. It is possible that we can profess, it's possible that we can recite, it is possible that we can celebrate the rituals that surround our religious life, but it's also possible that we can treat our neighbor without any recourse to the rituals, to the laws, and the commandments of God. We can treat these two commandments separate. God, we treat God in a good, honorable way, adoring in the confines of a church or mosque or name anywhere where people worship. But in our own everyday life, we treat our neighbors in a way that has no relationship with what we profess, with what we celebrate, and what we call ourselves as Christians or people of religion. In other words, we can forget that these two commandments are interrelated. We can keep going to the pilgrim of the building called the church, worship, sing, dance, and celebrate. But we can still keep pouching like the cat when we relate with our neighbors at workplace, in the streets as we drive, in school, and in all the ordinary circumstances. We can easily forget and fail to carry the love of God to the love of neighbor. True love of a neighbor springs from the love of God. On the other hand, there can be no true love of God which does not express itself in the love of a neighbor. If I have a problem with a neighbor, it is essentially because I have also a problem with God. It's because I have a problem with my religion. It's also because something is lacking in the way I connect with God. If there is a neighbor, if there is a family member I treat with disdain, I treat with disrespect. If there is a member of the community that I stop from assessing justice, assessing the fullness of the human being, respecting them all they are, it is essentially a symptom that my religion, my love for God, has a serious lacuna, has a serious gap. These two laws are interrelated. A religion that does not have love for God and neighbor ends us to be a loveless and a lifeless religion. It's not worthy practice. And therefore, what can happen when we create that dichotomy? We enter into the greatest sin. Not so much the sin of not loving our neighbor, but of not knowing our neighbor. It starts there. When we do not know our neighbor, the lack of knowledge, the lack of awareness of the presence of our neighbor is essentially going to impact how we love and treat our neighbors. If we treat our neighbors with indifference, it is essentially showing that we do not keep God's commandments. If we treat our neighbors as if they do not exist, as if they are not human beings, we have lost the law of love for God and for neighbor. Sometimes Jesus keeps reminding us every other time to love our neighbors and love our enemies. As if these were two different people. They aren't. They are often the same people. Our neighbors, also we turn to make them enemies. And so it is essentially a call that Jesus reminds us that we must treat our neighbors with love. And these neighbors are the same people that we turn into enemies. Sometimes when we meet a remote person, probably we have never seen, we treat them as persons. But what happens towards our neighbors? At times we treat the immediate neighbors as environment, the next door neighbor. We describe our neighbor as the barking dog. You know that neighbor of mine was a barking dog? That guy, a barking dog? You know that woman who has that noisy grill, plays the piano? We reduce our immediate neighbors into environments. And that way we fail to fulfill love for them. What do? We need to have a communication with them. Keep on communicating with them as persons. Talk to them about that dog as persons. About that drill that is happening in their house. About that piano they play. And be a person-to-person relationship. And then that opens us to the possibility and to love them. It helps us accommodate other people and treat them as what God has commanded us to. Another greatest Christian failure is failure to love. It's a sin. As we do to our neighbor, when we fail to love them, or when we withhold love from them. Look, at sometimes we can go to confession and confess all the things that we have been taught in catechism are sins. But we fail to remember that in a business deal, we lie to the buyer. In an office relationship, we lied to the people who came to the office. We failed to fulfill, to do all the things that go with the justice, that go with the respect for them, that go with honesty. We forget that. And we fail to realize in that way we have failed to love our neighbor. Issues of justice concern the love for our neighbor. Honesty in our offices in an ordinary way. When we go to buy or sell, they are essentially about the love of neighbor. This, when we disconnect our religious practice with our ordinary everyday life, we make our religion spiritual marriage. It's deprived of any spirituality. It becomes a routine. It becomes a cult. Jesus is calling us to exercise our capacity to love, which we often forget to, or we leave it too late at time. When we say, I wish I had told so and so I love him. He is now dead. He is now gone. She is no longer with us. We have the capacity to love, but we postpone. We are afraid to break that inside feeling of discomfort to love. This is the challenge that Jesus is setting before us. That if we call ourselves religious men and women, we can't have it one way, love of God and not love of neighbor, or love of neighbor without love of God. They two express an interrelated relationship. We pray and act as so.